welcome back to another new video. Today's video is going to actually be the last video in my series on the first Wizarding War. So if you haven't seen all the other videos I made in this series, definitely go and catch yourself up, have a little binge party, a little watch marathon, or else this final piece is just not going to make any sense. And just a little other housekeeping before we hop into that video. If you are not following me on TikTok, make sure you are. Also, check out my Etsy shop, follow me on Instagram. I'll have all my social medias linked in my bio. Okay, so let's jump right into the video. And today we are, of course, going to be talking about the aftermath of the First Wizarding War. So, Voldemort at that night at Godric's Hollow, he was stripped of almost all of his magical abilities. And somehow, though, he eventually did make his way to Albania, back to that forest he had been to years before, where he found Ravenclaw's lost item, that whole story. And he tried to gain a physical form back by briefly possessing snakes, because, like I mentioned in the last video, one of the very few magical abilities he still had left was the ability to possess animals and people. But this would actually cause the snakes to die sooner, because their bodies were just not equipped to perform magic, so it really just wasn't working out for him. And what he really needed was to possess a human, and he needed to do this because the magic he needed to do to regain a physical form really did require a wand. So what he really needs is a human, and we know that eventually he finds one in Quirrell. But he knew better to go into the human world and look for one right away, because he knew that the Aurors were still abroad all over the world searching for any trace of him. And so he waited, desperately hoping that one of his followers would find him and restore him to power, to a physical form. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit, Peter Pettigrew had hidden Voldemort's wand before turning into a rat to prevent it from falling into Ministry hands. And in rat form, he literally scurried all the way from London to Devon. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. I'm also not sure how far that is, so I don't know if that's far or not for a rat to go. I think it sounds pretty far. And basically out there in Devon, Percy Weasley finds him and takes him in as a pet, calling him Scabbers. So this is how he comes to be a part of the Weasley family, which is a good coincidence, I guess. And this allowed him to keep up to date with everything that was happening in the wizarding world. And the Weasleys quickly realized that Scabbers was an extraordinary rat, because other rats of his species only lived an average of 3 years, but obviously Scabbers lived 20, so they knew he was special. And he lived so long that he was eventually passed on to Ron. And this works out perfectly for Peter Pettigrew, because when Ron eventually befriends Harry, Peter Pettigrew views this as an opportunity to capture and deliver Harry to Voldemort. So his plan was to capture and deliver Harry to Voldemort when Voldemort returns, as a way to prove to the Death Eaters that he wasn't a traitor. Okay, so shifting gears sort of again to what else is going on at this time. So Barty Crouch Sr.'s, remember, he is the head of magical law enforcement throughout this whole thing. His wife is sick and is dying. And her dying wish is to see their son, Barty Crouch Jr., out of Azkaban. So remember, Barty Crouch Jr. is in Azkaban for being a Death Eater. His father had sentenced him to a life sentence along with Bellatrix and Rodolphus and some other Death Eaters. But Barty wanted to appease his wife, grant her dying wish. So he organizes an assisted escape from being in the position of power in the Ministry. And so, yeah, and even though he was the one who sent his son there to life, so that's highly questionable and unethical. But basically they used Polyjuice Potion to switch appearances of the mother and son. So the sick mom looks like Barty Crouch Jr., Barty Crouch Jr. looks like the mom. And basically they go and visit at Azkaban, and he takes Junior home and leaves his wife. Yeah, well, she was dying, and that was her dying wish. So Barty Crouch uses the Imperious Curse and an invisibility cloak to imprison Junior in their home, constantly watched over by Winky, their house elf. And after his son, quote unquote, actually his wife, dies in Azkaban, he also fakes the death of his wife so that, all the stories line up. And so it looks to everyone like he's just lost his wife and his son. But after the war, his reputation took a major hit, not from this actually, but I don't think anyone found out, but basically I think people sort of blamed him for how his son turned out. So he was no longer a contender to replace Minister Bagnold as the Minister of Magic. And he was actually moved from being the head of magical law enforcement to being the head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation. And basically this was a demotion. I mean, not officially, but it definitely was a less prestigious role within the Ministry. And while imprisoned, Barty Crouch Jr. grew more insane and more fanatically obsessed with all of Voldemort and all of his ideals, and so yeah, he's in the basement going crazy. And also at the same time, the survivors of the war are trying to rebuild society, but people were still very afraid of Voldemort in the years following. You know, they wouldn't even say his name, and this continued even a decade later, as we saw at the beginning of the series. So many were horrified by the idea that he might not really be gone, and many thought he wasn't. Many thought he was still out there. And Dumbledore and the Order were among those people who thought that he was still out there, and were convinced that he would return. And so Dumbledore contacted his friend Nicholas Flamel and asked him to basically hide and lock away the Philosopher's Stone in a Gringotts vault, because they knew if Voldemort got this, that would be an option, a way that he could regain his strength. So they wanted to lock it away so he couldn't get it. And also at the same time, Severus Snape vows to protect Harry at all costs. And so that is the end of the first Wizarding War, guys. Wow. I hope you guys enjoyed this series as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did, definitely please like this video, leave a comment of what you want to see in upcoming videos, and yeah, until next time, bye y'all.